Now, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some of the work we're doing in Cumbria in the Lake District to try and bring about the conditions for rainforest restoration. So it's less to do with the kind of management within the forest, but more how we can create those conditions for the rainforest of the future. And I'm going to focus on one of the kind of core sites within my project area, and I'll explain that to you in a little minute, and the wider context of landscape restoration. So unlike the previous speakers, I'm not a rainforest expert, but on the plus side, personally, I've been planting trees at Haweswater for over 30 years. So I feel pretty well invested in rainforest conservation. So I work for Cumbria Connect. We're a partnership project, and our whole ambition is to restore nature across landscape scale. So we've got 42,000 hectares in our project, and we're focused particularly on woodlands, grasslands and peatlands. We've got a big focus on future farming, so we're working a lot with farmers and commoning communities, etc. We're looking at species, particularly the kind of missing species. So we're putting water voles back into our landscape. We've got enclosed beavers, and we hope very soon to have wild beavers and other species too. And we realise we cannot deliver nature conservation without bringing people and communities on board. So we've got a whole load of kind of stakeholder activities and ways of bringing people onto board, so on board, so that nature restoration becomes incorporated into the way people think about their landscapes and their place. Lots of skills and learning associated with that, and really importantly, we've got a big science program. I'll just go through one little aspect of that, but a big science program trying to underpin the evidence base behind all this change. So basically, we're a series of projects. Cumbria Connect is funded through the Endangered Landscapes Programme, which is Rowsley money. We've got 5 years of funding. We've got a series of overlapping projects. So the kind of olive colour here is our original Cumbria Connect landscape. Since then, we've taken on 2 new projects, or 2 new projects have sparked up in our landscape. One is which is the brown running through, which is a landscape recovery project going all the way from Penrith to Kendal. And the other green one that kind of runs through our project is another landscape recovery project, which is the Eastern Fells Landscape Recovery. And for those of you not in England, landscape recovery is the kind of highest tier of agri-environment scheme available, and we're in development phase and it's being piloted. But if they're successful and they're adopted and they're spread more widely, it's going to be a fantastic mechanism potentially for landscape restoration and rainforest restoration too. So it's got potential. We've just got to get our government to get properly behind it. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about one of the sites within that landscape, which is Haweswater, which is a partnership site between RSPB and United Utilities. So it's all water catchment. United Utilities are very interested in working in partnership with RSPB because the type of landscape change RSPB wants to see and inspire is also correlates very closely with raw water quality. There's a really good tie-in and a really strong partnership there. Our whole ethos at Haweswater, which is about 2,000 hectares of uplands on the eastern fringes of the Lake District, is about restoring kind of natural processes to the landscape. So we start to kind of blur the lines between habitats, and we start to see those habitats becoming more dynamic. And the image you can see at the moment is the landscape that as we took it over. This is the landscape from 2015. And that's part of a 50-year vision, and I'll show you where we're hoping it's going to go in a minute. But this landscape is a very typical Lake District landscape. There's a lot of deer, there's a lot of open habitat, there's a lot of bracken, the woodlands are restricted, the rivers are very straightened, the peat bogs are heavily drained, you'll see in that top left corner there. It's not a very naturally rich and diverse landscape, and there's certainly not a lot of dynamism in that landscape with the heavy grazing that goes on. So as you can see, as time goes on, by 2040, and this is part of a much longer vision, we start to see those lines blurring. We start to see the woodlands moving up the fell. We start to see the bracken being recolonized. Peat bogs are restoring. The river in the just below the red kite there has been re-wiggled. So there's a whole series of landscape restoration going on, of which the rainforest is a really important part. And I've got signs there because even in that previous landscape, if you walk through, you can see where the rainforests used to be. The bracken indicates the richer soils, which would have once been woodland. You find pockets of bluebells in the middle of nowhere, and you find you find wood anemones in the middle of nowhere. You find isolated trees. They're all signs of where the woodland would have once been. And our long-term goal at Haweswater is to try and bring those back. Again, from the same set of images, this is, so at Haweswater, we've already got some fantastic ancient woodland resource, which is in good condition. So we've got Naddle Forest Triple SI, but it's only a relatively small part of the kind of wider site and where the woodlands would have once been. But it's abundant with mosses, ferns, lichens, and bryophytes. We don't have pine martins yet, but this is part of our 25-year vision. So we've got a really good core of habitat, which we want to spread out more widely across the site. So as I said, our woodlands are missing, they're fragmented and they've been trapped. So this bottom image really does the opposite of what Gordon was describing earlier, where he's talking about valuable eco-terms in terms of your woodland edge. Here, it's just hard up against a hard fence. And we see that's in so many places in the Lake District where they've just been contained. They're unable to kind of move and express themselves. So again, what we're trying to do is to kind of recreate the conditions to recreate that dynamism so woodlands can start to expand. And the top pictures are just a very typical kind of Lake District view with some different habitats, but really just kind of open bare fells that should have a lot more trees on them. And even right up to those higher altitudes, we'd expect to see more trees, you know, in terms of the kind of montane scrub as well. And when we're talking about rainforest and restoring rainforest at Haweswater, which has got high altitudes, we're also talking about those kind of montane scrubs as well as those kind of richer lower level oak woodlands. So what are we doing to kind of restore the landscape? So this first image, you can see we've got the kind of extensively grazed open landscapes with native breed cattle. So previously to us taking over this whole site was heavily sheep grazed. We've taken all the sheep off this common, off Mardale Common. It's now extensively grazed. So starting to create conditions where trees might be able to regenerate and get away. We heard Gordon particularly talk about deer and the problems of deer. We have the same problems in the Lake District. So we're working with our partners to try and collaborate over deer management across these landscapes. National Park, for the first time, is developing a park-wide deer management strategy, of which a strong part. So in order to get those conditions right, the first thing we need to do is get the grazing right so that the woodlands are able to expand and the trees are able to get away. But we're also, and you can see in those big open landscapes, we've also got a lack of seed sources in a lot of places. So we're still going to need to intervene in the first few years, maybe even the first few decades, to try and get trees into that landscape to get those seed sources for the future. So there's a mixture of kind of tree planting we do, protected plantings, we do bare plantings in some places, and more recently we've taken on to doing these planting cages where we sort of clump plant them, densely pack these cages to provide these kind of seed sources for the future. That's one of the things we're working on at the moment. So there's a whole suite of ways in which mechanisms that we're using to restore, to fund and deliver that restoration. So countryside stewardship is our existing mechanism. So that's the kind of one of the higher tiers of agri-environment schemes. We're moving on to landscape recovery now, we hope. So the current stewardship scheme, countryside stewardship scheme, is funding those grazing changes and allowing for those grazing changes. It's also funding the planting of about 16,000 trees across that common you see there. And we talked a little bit about the science. So those little grids at the top end of the common there are part of quite a detailed grazing experiment where we're looking at different conditions and different grazing conditions and monitoring the kind of response of tree regeneration in those plots. So everything we do, we're trying to underpin by a strong science. And we've got a much wider monitoring program going across that whole landscape as well. And we have our own tree nursery at Haweswater as well. So we're trying to make sure that most of the trees that we replant out back onto the estate are locally sourced. So we're much more self-sufficient now with the provision of trees for our projects. And we're also able to support some projects more widely as well. We're not 100% self-sufficient, and we don't necessarily want to be, because we do need to kind of make sure we've got genetic diversity. Bringing in trees from elsewhere as well is still part of the project, but we want to be as self-sufficient as possible using our own native stock. So we've invested money. We got money through the Green Recovery Grant from DEFRA to turn some old cheap sheds into this kind of more modern a nursery, and we're growing thousands and thousands of trees a year there. We're also growing in that nursery a lot of alpine Arctic plants as well. So as well as the trees, we're also trying to put some of those kind of, particularly the high level Arctic alpine plants, back into the landscape where we've managed to reduce the grazing pressure. So that's an important part of our work too. And the work that we're currently being supported by through the Species Survival Fund and is part of the kind of plant life and woodlife rainforest restoration project is enabling us to get some of those tree cages back up into those less accessible parts of the landscape. So with that grant money, we're able to plant 500 tree cages, 3.5 meter squared tree cages, which we're going to pack plant. There's going to be 10,000 more trees going out into that landscape on top of that 16,000 we saw earlier. And those will hopefully provide the future seed sources as we continue, as those continue to grow within inside those cages, and we continue to get the conditions right, natural regeneration to occur. We'll get those seed sources back into those kind of really remote locations. And they're so remote, we're going to need to kind of helicopter lift in the materials to get those done. They're kind of up in the kind of higher reaches, the higher, more alpine reaches of the site, most of those. So a really important piece of the kind of intervention and the kickstarting is to get those seed sources back into the landscape. Just finishing on a guy, shrubs will quite. Rainforests aren't just somebody else's problem. They're not from another part of the world. They're right here on our doorsteps, and we shouldn't simply be trying to save them, but we also need to restore them. So quick whistle stop tour, but thank you very much for listening.